Welcome. This will be my video on the 2011 version of Conan the Barbarian. I'm going to start with a review that's going to have zero spoilers for this or anything else. Then I will get into what I call the thoughts section, where I spoil everything about this movie. I might go into spoilers about the Arnie version. I guess I'll either let you know at the time, possibly even hold them in an index finger or something so you can skip ahead. Because you don't need to have watched that one to watch this one. And I think so the movie is rated R, so this video B. And by and large, love this film. It's not quite as good as the original in a couple of key ways. It exceeds it in some others, arguably not the most important ones. Since the oceans drank Atlantis, Hollywood has tried to make an adaptation of Conan that, if not amazing, is at least fairly profitable. And I don't know, I thought most of this movie worked. It was about what I expected that it would be. I watched the trailers back, 15 fucking years ago. Now I feel old. Yeah, was more or less what I expected it to be from those, for better or for worse. More better, less worse. Yeah, so I think let's start with the... right, I guess I will just briefly note, I believe this was originally released in 3D. I did not watch it in 3D. It's not one of those movies that just is obnoxious to watch if you don't watch in 3D. I have a certain fondness for Friday the 13th 3D, but it definitely is constantly calling attention to, not constantly, but whenever there is a distinct 3D effect, it really calls attention to itself. Whereas something like Avatar, you can watch that in 2D. You should probably, if you're going to watch any of the Avatar movies, at least once in 3D, I would say is worth it. But, I've watched, the first two I've rewatched in 2D, and it's perfectly fine. Now, I think it is a good place to start with. This does quite well at setup and payoff. In some ways, not quite as well as the original. And tension and suspense are also quite well done. Now, so psychological accuracy, authenticity to itself, if not quite real life, but it's not supposed to have real life authenticity, and level of detail are all quite impressive. There were characters where I genuinely felt like, okay, I understand where they're coming from. I don't approve necessarily, but I will acknowledge the villains are not necessarily as compelling as, for example, the Arnie version. Right, I meant to, I guess we are still at the start of the video. I have watched, other than these two, I also watched the second of the Arnie ones, and that movie that some consider to be, Arnie is more or less playing Conan. What's it called again? Red Sonja. But it's been 20 years since I last watched Red Sonja or Conan the Destroyer. I have not read any of the books or comics. I don't have a problem with the concept. I don't know, maybe at some point I will try to read some more. I sometimes do miss. But yeah. So this will be based on, these two movies primarily, the two Conan the Barbarian movies. Now, I will definitely say I felt like in some respects this did a better job characterizing women, female characters, than the original. And it never really feels like it just loses its nerve, or that it didn't have enough to feel like Conan. And yeah, the level of detail, there are a number of things where something is implied and we don't spend a lot of time on it, but we do get a sense of, like, every place feels lived in real, like none of it feels location scouted or set designed to within an inch of its own life. And I think that does. So yeah, as far as tone, this definitely has a good amount of grit, roughly equivalent to the original. The original does have a couple of bits that go a little, dare I say, campy, a little more like, yeah, not super easy to take serious. And that is an area where this one, it feels a little bit scared of going quite there. There were definitely times where I wouldn't necessarily say it feels like it's a holding back, but just, at some point, probably pretty early in production, because I didn't really notice any like remains of it. They decided we're not going to go quite as, the 1980s, just there are a number of movies from that time that just went, to places that, I don't know, sometimes I miss. Like, I'm thankfully able to watch a bunch of stuff from the 80s, but I don't know. If you used to like 80s movies and haven't watched one in a while, if you think you might like it, yeah, I can recommend it. I try to every so often watch something from some decades past. Anyway, I think that does. Oh, right. I should note, for those who didn't watch, yeah, didn't watch. I do not have a huge number of criticisms of the Arnie version, and yeah, a lot of what I say in this video that pertains to that one is not really criticism of that one. I will somewhat compare and contrast the two, and yeah, already mentioned I'm handling spoilers for that. And let's see, what was the other thing that I want to say? No, yeah. I guess the rest of it I will spread out over the video. So I definitely did feel like with this, there was a discussion or two during pre-production about how much they wanted this to resemble the Arnie version. And it is very nice to be able to honestly say this is not trying to be a remake. It shares a title. It didn't even always do that. There are definitely some elements in common. It feels somewhat like a riff on it. Like, if you haven't watched the original in a while and then you watch this, it's not like just watching, yeah, different cast do the same thing as the original. I will say there's at least one thing where it feels like I don't mind that they brought back that element, but they definitely didn't. I don't know, maybe they didn't completely understand why it worked so well in the original. I'll talk about it in the spoiler section. But yeah, it definitely, they did a good job just having references without letting them dominate this. Like, this perhaps did also come out at a good time for, today some franchise fare will be just overly fan servicey. I have a lot of love for MCU and adjacent and Disney Star Wars. I'm willing to admit, the MCU and Disney Star Wars do have, well, I suppose not just Disney. Star Wars, since the prequels at least, there's perhaps a little bit much of fan service. Anyway, I think that does, but yeah, the dialogue, Conan remains a man of few words and significant actions. I would not say I was quite as invested in him as I was the Arnie version, but more on that later. And they definitely do a pretty good job. Like, there are bits with expository dialogue, they pretty much trim it down to just bare minimum. Like, you don't really get more than you need to follow it. This is thankfully devoid of that, I guess, are we calling it Netflix dialogue? You know, I haven't watched very much that has that, but I've read that recently Netflix, subscription that I do not have, apparently recently they started having this thing where, you know, they don't seem to completely understand why, like the whole second screen thing. You don't actually need to. You don't need to do that. And that is, apparently characters will constantly state and restate what they're doing in case someone is watching it on a second screen or zoned out briefly or something. You know, it was definitely something I noticed about the most recent Mission Impossible. Yeah. Let's see. I think... Yeah, and like by and large, I would say the major characters all get just enough. Some of them it's only barely, but all of them do. All the major characters get just enough of characterization. Sometimes it's through dialogue, sometimes it is through actions, decisions, and such. So, I have not watched that much else by director Marcus Nispel. I do think overall this is at least a little bit better than his Friday the 13th, which is a much better movie than the Nightmare on Elm Street remake, which is, you know, along with the sixth movie, the only two of the, I guess depending on how you count them, 8 or 9, let's go with 9, Freddy Krueger films that I am just, you know, not the biggest fan of. You know, I can sit down and watch all the rest of them. I don't know if I'll ever rewatch those two. And I almost do feel bad because I get what they're going for. I appreciate turning, you know, like the sixth one is basically a comedy, and by that point made sense to do that with Freddy Krueger. It's just not the funniest. And the remake, I mean, I'm a big fan of a decent chunk of the cast. Um, there were some ideas there that I just wish they had handled better. Anyway, I think, yeah, I am almost definitely going to rewatch this movie before the next time I rewatch the remake of Friday the 13th. And I think that would still be the case even if I hadn't already watched that movie multiple times. Now, yeah, I you know, he is, based on these two movies, he appears to be a director who... Would it be funny if I just ended the sentence there? He appears to be a director. Now, on to the next thing. No, he seems like he wants to deliver what the audience expects from these. You know, I know he also did, was it I want to say Texas Chainsaw Massacre movie that he also did, which I haven't heard purely positive things about that one, but from what I hear, like, it delivered what was anticipated to be what people wanted from a Texas Chainsaw Massacre movie at that particular time. But he also doesn't feel like just like mercenary director, like for hire kind of, you know, I sense passion in both of these movies, and from what I hear, also evident in Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And yeah, let's move on to, so the cinematography. There was at least one time where, and it from what I could tell, it was on purpose, you know, but there was a bit where some geography was not established in a way that I completely, I don't know, it was okay, and it was of its time. Now, other than that, yeah, it, you know, they find a pretty good balance between the way it's filmed. It's chaotic, but I was almost always able to get a pretty decent handle on what's going on. Like, I almost never felt like, what am I even looking at right now kind of thing, even though it moves fast. And yeah, it's not quite like frenetic and headache inducing. The editing is quite good. I already mentioned this for the dialogue, but really it's true of everything. Like, they trimmed this down to where, like, I think it's 100 minutes if you don't count the end credits. It does not really have anything that doesn't mean anything that isn't there for a reason. And that is definitely an area where, I mentioned that in my video on the Arnie version. That movie does have couple of times at least where something will just go on for longer than it needs to, and I don't really know why. Past establishing atmosphere and letting us sit with something, which I do appreciate about it. And this one, in some ways, is more in a hurry. It is very 2010's action movie paced, and that is, of course, which of these you prefer is very much down to which of these movies you prefer is down to which of these decades you prefer. And yeah, there's some quite effective editing. The action scene editing is quite, like, it never really slows down in a way that it shouldn't. And yeah, I think that does bring us nicely to... So yeah, I was also impressed by production value, set design, locations, costumes, and makeup. They do a good job of having them convey things about characters, like you see, where someone lives, their workplace, and things like that. And there's also a pretty good variety to the different places. That is one of the areas where both of these are strong. And yeah, the costumes, like, I got a real sense of, the different people's culture and context and such. Another area that they're both versions are quite good. And yeah, the music, it really fits the kind of the vibe they're going for, the atmosphere, very, very nicely. And the sound design is great. There's some stuff that, yeah, really memorable sounds made. So the characters, I don't have a huge amount to say about Conan himself, and that does feel a little bit unfortunate. Yeah, I don't know. I definitely think it is at least a little bit of an issue. This movie, I would argue, is a little bit more afraid of having Conan look anything less than really impressive almost all of the time, where the original, like, there was one bit that, like, I think it was the producers who was telling the director, you gotta cut that out, and he was like, this is the point of the scene. And thankfully he won, and I definitely agree with them. I talk about that in my video on the first one. And yeah, it just it's a little bit unfortunate. He does remain a badass, and I do think there are efforts to give him at least some personality. And Rachel Nichols does quite well. I can't say too much about her character before getting into spoilers, but yeah, I've liked her in everything I've seen her in. Other than this, she was one of the few bright spots in G.I. Joe, and she was quite good on Alias. And I would like to watch more. If you have a specific recommendation, let me know in the comments. I am definitely open to watching more that she appears in. I think that does lead us nicely into, I guess I'll just briefly note, so yeah, Ron Perlman plays Conan's dad this time around, and, you know, the moment that I found that out, I was like, I mean, I guess if you want to go with the single most obvious choice, you know, sure. Seriously though, he's fantastic. When isn't Ron Perlman fucking amazing? There are movies that I watched because Ron Perlman appeared in them, you know. Like, it really is no wonder. There are directors who just love to, you know, other than Guillermo del Toro, you've also got that guy, shit, I don't remember his name, but there's that French director who made The Quest for Fire. Oh, hold on. I have it right here. I'll find it momentarily. Jean-Jacques Annaud. You know, he also, I don't know if he's still doing that, but there was a while where he put him in fucking everything, you know. Enemy at the Gates, Name of the Rose, you know, just like if he was making a movie, there was a part in it for Ron Perlman. And like every single time, like even if I wasn't already a fan of Ron Perlman, every single time I would have been like, that's really all, you know, that guy's great. That's acting talent, you know. Now, that does lead us nicely into the villain. So Stephen Lang, probably at least part because of the first Avatar, you know, yeah, he plays the central villain here, and he is really, really great. I would definitely say, I already mentioned, you know, villains aren't quite as compelling, although I'll get to shortly, but yeah, but both of them do well. Rose McGowan is probably the one that I felt came across as the stronger, the more compelling character. But yeah, you know, I would say it's probably down to the, you know, the writing slightly underserving them, and they are undeserving of that immense talent for both, and the fact that, you know, I don't know, maybe that would have been a decent time to have a tiny bit more, like, you know, I mentioned that it's trimmed down. That is one area where, you know, it's also just like, my God, can you imagine trying to follow up, trying to be yeah, to James Earl Jones? Like, that's a completely thankless job, and I would definitely say they do as much as they can. But, you know, he's one of the ones where, you know, sometimes the camera will linger on him in the first movie, and you don't necessarily mind because, my God, the talent, just yeah. Right, no, yeah, that, yes, I did want to make sure to note the, you know, I'll briefly talk Rose McGowan, and then, yeah. So, like Planet Terror, this was a movie that as soon as I saw the trailer, you know, back when it originally came out, based on having watched Charmed and Jawbreaker, I was like, this is the kind of role, and Scream, Jesus, how did I forget Scream? This is the kind of role that is like perfect for Rose McGowan. You know, this is what she was put on this earth to play, and she's amazing. Like, this is, if you watched the Mulan remake, first of all, I'm very sorry. Like, I'm not responsible for making that movie, and I've definitely never told anyone they should watch it, but I feel your pain. If you were like, The Witch, like, not a bad idea, but underwhelming, watch this. Like, this is the kind of just, yeah. And I'm not just talking about the fact that that one's like PG-13 or something. It's definitely not R. And this is not only an R, but a hard R. I did want to make sure to note, so with Jason Momoa, that was very much a case where I think he does about as well as he could given what he, you know, it's not the most carefully drawn character, you know, and he was, of course, very obvious choice. I am not the most familiar with his other work from around this time. I guess other than this, I think the only things I've seen him in are when he plays Aquaman. So I wasn't expecting him to play this role, anything resembling Aquaman. I've only seen clips, not entire episodes of Game of Thrones, but from what I can tell, there is a certain resemblance between his Conan and, I want to say, Khal Drogo is what that character's called. And I don't think that's a problem. I mean, there's a certain amount of like DNA in common, from what I understand of Khal Drogo. But it is one of those cases where I appreciate that maybe it wasn't common knowledge when they were making this movie. We know today, if you know pretty much anything about Jason Momoa, he has just so much charisma. Whether you see him play a character, like I haven't watched. Yeah, I already mentioned that, but I've caught trailers. He's in Fast and Furious movie apparently, and I mean, yeah, just the trailer. Like, my God, does he look like he's having fun? I right now I'm not currently planning on watching that franchise, but if I was gonna, his would be one of the characters I would really be looking forward to watching. But yeah, movies, interviews, just like he seems incredibly charming. Like he's part of a meme, for the, like, there's that image. I don't think I've ever actually seen the video. I've only seen the image and then, the various memes made with it. But there's like an image of, I want to say, like a red carpet where, like, so Henry Cavill is just standing there, just like, I'm not sure if it's he's having his picture taken or he's doing some sort of interview or something. And just, you see Jason Momoa like duck down and like he's got this mischievous grin on his face and he's running up to, like, surprise him, and just like, yeah, I feel like that image just sums up Jason Momoa. I don't even drink alcohol, but I'd still have a beer with him, and thus, it is a little unfortunate that his charisma does not really come through in this movie for almost all of it, which again, I think, I mean, maybe their interpretation of Conan is just less charismatic, which I respect. I think it is more interesting if there's more of a difference between them than not. I just wish that there had been something else to replace the charisma, because instead we're left with just, he's just kind of a stoic badass. There's really not much to him. You've seen this character in so many other action movies, and that's a little too bad for such an iconic character. A character like, yeah, let's see, I guess 100 years uh, old by now, something like that, and an actor who's capable of such charisma, and a movie that would not be worse off if there was at least a bit more charisma. I will say there are others who help pick up the slack. But it's also, that was one of the times where Arnie, in some of his work, he doesn't get to show that much charisma, which is not always bad. I am glad that he turned it off completely when he played the Terminator, but in that original movie specifically. But yeah, when I think to the Arnie version of Conan, his charisma is one of the things I think about, and as such, it's a little unfortunate. I don't know if maybe they just felt like that Momoa couldn't match that level of charisma. I mean, I would argue that he can. He might even actually be able to exceed it, which I would not say that that's true of a huge number of people. Like, Schwarzenegger has a tremendous amount of charisma. Like, he is someone, yeah, any interview and any role that allows him to, like, holy crap, it's just an absolute wealth of it. Anyway, I think that does... So there's a couple of other characters I don't think I can really talk too much about because spoilers, but yeah. I would say there's not really any genuinely weak performance. Now, yeah, that does bring us nicely to the pacing. So yeah, it moves fast, and there's more individual action scenes, and they're also more dynamic than the original, which once again just comes down to 80s versus 2010s kind of, yeah. The special effects are not always so special. I will say I appreciate that they didn't really go overboard on this. That is something I was expecting, more effects, or at least more that were not practical. But it does seem like they went practical whenever that was practical. And yeah, some of the violence and gore is definitely done like that. There is some digital blood, which I'm still not the biggest fan of, but I appreciate there were times where you kind of couldn't have done that without doing it like that. There was one specific effect that I really felt like, okay, that is just not completely convincing, but it's not by itself on screen for terribly long. And that is also an area where, with the original, it was, primarily practical. There was actually, I guess, come to think of it, I'm not sure there's a huge difference between how much, like, so in the original it wasn't particularly CG, at least not like 3D CG. It was more like, yeah, it was visual effects, but not that kind. And but yeah, roughly the same amount of seconds of less than completely convincing special effects, I would say. But that one does, of course, gain a lot from its use of, so yeah, both of them have, like, if someone, let's say, loses a limb or something, it's likely to be a, I forget what those are called, prosthetic? No. Yeah, it's practical. They made something to look like a limb. The original definitely does have this beat when it comes to animatronics, and I do appreciate they couldn't have, like, the one bit of CG that I didn't think was great in this. There's no way they could have done that with an animatronic. It would have tremendously limited what they would have been able to do. So I don't blame them. It would have slowed down the action pacing in a way that, yeah. And that is, again, one of the things with the first one. There are times where they're just so in love with the animatronic, and I don't blame them. It's all wonderful that they perhaps spend a little bit too long on just the one animatronic for, yeah. Yeah, the stunt work is great, and that is definitely an area where this one does top the original. And part of that is, of course, just how much, filmmaking has evolved. Like, you can do things, in 2010 you could do things that you would not have been able to do safely in the 80s. But they're also well used. I pretty much always cared when there was a stunt. I would also say, when it comes to the violence, blood, and gore, most of the time I felt something. It was never just like numbing, which I would also say of Nispel's Friday the 13th, whereas I wouldn't really say it for Jason X, for example. But yeah, I was I would say the amount of blood, violence, and gore in this movie is about what you would expect from a 2010's hard R. It has since been surpassed, but I wouldn't say that this needed more. It never feels like it's like, you know, struggling to, it doesn't feel censored, and it also doesn't feel like try hard. I would say each time I cared enough about the situation. We don't always know the individuals involved in violence and gore in this movie, but like we understand, well, this is someone who works with or for this other person, and look at what they're doing. So, there's definitely catharsis in the violence. In real life, I'm against violence as anything other than an absolute last resort. But in media, I think it can be a good way to work out, yeah, there's a satisfaction to seeing in fiction someone who is terrible, face something like that. Now, I also appreciated the level of creativity to the action scenes, which does also exceed the original, which once again is down to when they were both made. And like there were times in this where one type of action scene will lead into another type in a way reminiscent of when James Cameron was making Terminator movies. Which, to be clear, I'm not saying he has to go back, Kate. I think that is a franchise that should probably just, I don't know, I can imagine, I've heard good things about some of the more recent games. I've wish-listed some of them. I think I believe I own at least one that I'm just, I'll get to it, and there'll be a video for sure. But, as movies, I think they've beyond proven at this point, there's no more, you can't squeeze blood out of a stone. Although I'm sure Conan would try. And I've heard it is also true of some of the Mad Max movies. I don't often remember that being a thing in the first one. I'm afraid that's the only one I watched so far. I do own the first 4, and I will get my hands on the 5th, and I will do videos on all of them. It might not be soon, because the 5th is so recent. It might be a while before it's like on sale or something, but I'm going to do them, and I'm looking forward to all but rewatching the original, which I'm sorry, that movie did not work that well for me. That's part of why, I think the first time I watched that was the only time so far, like 10, 15 years ago, and it just was not what I think I was kind of expecting what I understand the second one to be, and I know that's not fair, but I'm giving them another chance. Anyway, I guess that does pretty much cover, okay, I'm just real quick going to go over the fantasy element is I don't know if they felt the original went too far or not too far enough. Maybe it's that they knew that it would be difficult to really compete on that ground, so instead they knew that they would beat it, get yourself an egg, beat it as far as like action scenes go, so that's where they put their focus. This one does not have as much, like, magic is mentioned, and there is some, but it tends to be more like acting performance than like special effect that really, is allowed to that we sit with, whereas, action scenes, for example, go on for longer, where the first one, there were effects bits where they would spend, a while on that. That is part of that movie's visual identity. Yeah, I think that does pretty much cover. Yeah, there are still some aspects here that come across a bit misogynistic. It is clearly, they made some efforts to dial it back compared to the original, and at least some of the time that did work. And yeah, I am gonna go into detail fairly shortly because this is it for the spoiler-free review. So yeah, I rate this 7, action-heavy, well-acted, pretty well-written barbarians on a quest out of 10. And for comparison, the original one is an 8 out of 10. That brings us to the thoughts section. So I'm just real quick on that, and there we go. Yeah, thoughts. From here on out, I'm spoiling absolutely everything about this movie. I am gonna make up my mind by the time I start comparing it directly to the original. I'll let you know at that point if I'm spoiling the original. Yeah. And how. I think I am gonna try to keep this chronological. So yeah, I think it worked that the very, very start definitely reminds us of the original. Some of the words, I believe, are the exact same. Like, it still opens with, since, the thing about oceans, yeah, let's see, since the oceans drank Atlantis, I think it was. Yeah. And I thought it worked well as this, like, because it's delivering some exposition. That's where we find out about the mask, the pureblood sacrifice thing, and the fact that it's necromancy. And those three, inform the rest of, every time we see the villains, we know that they need, they get the rest of the mask in the attack on Conan's village. They spend some time trying to get Tamara, who's the only remaining pureblood of Acheron. And we know if they do manage to carry it out, like even before we realize, it's the, it's her. It's the woman that was, the wife of the Lang character. I'm afraid my wrists are too sore to look up too many names right now, so I think I'm going to be referring to people by their actor name for when I don't remember the character name. We know they want to bring, we find out they want to bring her back, and we know that they're trying to do necromancy, and it's just, like, the first one had cannibalism and a cult, and this one, that's not a spoiler, that's, established quite early. But this, it is this thing of, like, they thought of something else that just gets to us, like the lizard brain is provoked by the idea of the dead walking, so. But, yeah. That, I thought that it was a good introduction to Conan, and I appreciate how differently he is characterized, because the original, the first time we see him, he is a quiet child sitting and paying close attention to his father explaining about the sword. And we do get that relatively early here. There's clear respect there. Like, it seems like, he does want to impress his father, but there is also this element of, we're told about fire and ice. He has too much fire in him. He is passionate. And the thing is, I don't know that I really felt like the movie, I mean, I guess by the end he has enough ice that, I mean, I guess we've all had enough of ice by now, for anyone who didn't hate them from the jump. But there is enough that he is able to, he is, for example, careful to help protect Tamara there in the ending, in the climax, where earlier he was, kind of throwing himself into battle, which, in a way that isn't completely, safe, which I feel like would have hit harder if like maybe they had him be injured by the Picts. If I understand correctly, those are Picts, in the well, that's how they're referred to in the behind the scenes anyway. Yeah, I think it works that he's the only of the young of the village to fight the Picts. Everyone else, run away. But I don't know what is supposed to be the turning point for him. When did he, like, is it because they had sex that now he cares enough about, like, is she the only one he cares enough about for that to be the, I don't know. Whereas the similar element in the first one, we have the scene of the father explaining, yeah, like if in that movie it is a major theme, and here it just felt like, well, it's in the original, we better put it in. So that did have me a tiny bit worried about the rest of the movie, but thankfully not long after it became clear, no, they are doing things different. So there in this movie are 2 attacks on Conan's village. One of them he repels, the other is the successful one, which was another area where I was a little bit worried about the story pacing here. Like the first one really hits the ground running with the story, and this one seems to maybe want to spend a little bit more time developing Conan before the story takes off, which again, ultimately, I didn't feel like there was that much to his character comparatively, and yeah, thus I don't think it was the best way to, but I think it works that there are 2 attacks and Conan repels one, is unable to repel the other, because in the first one it's very much this thing of like Conan has, when he is young, he has yet to prove himself, and then when he comes of age, he gets chances to. In this one, he fought off the first ones, but then with the second one, he is unable to help. He doesn't win there. He barely survives, and that helps inform for the rest of it. Part of it is he wants revenge for his father, but he also feels a need to prove himself, and that was another thing that I felt they could have perhaps done a little bit more with. Now, I think, yeah, I appreciate that they, once again, not a spoiler, you find out almost immediately. This one does not. Okay, let me just think. I guess I'll just leave it to, there's an element very early in the first movie that they do not repeat here, and I think that was the right choice. I think they got out of that element what they could in the first, and here would have felt like a retread. And it's also, it in part goes to pacing, because I don't think I need to explain that further. Let's see, yeah, I thought it was, I liked the way that, yeah, honestly, I think I will. Okay, I swear I'm not going to go into every single. I'm not going to hyperanalyze every single detail, but I think there are a number of things they did well. So, with one of the very first things we see after the backstory, Conan runs through the village, which I think they did a fantastic job. Like, it feels like a place people live and work. The extras, the little bits of like set design, the way that they, the location itself, fantastic. Like, it really felt like, okay, this is an actual place, which, like, obviously we know it's not. Like, that's not how movies work. Like, you don't find an old Sumerian village to film in. You find a part of nature that is like, we could build a pretty good approximation of a Sumerian village here and film it. But it really looks convincing, and yeah, we see Ron Perlman's character, Conan's dad man, be standing there talking to the young and explaining, this is how you prove that you're ready to fight with the men of the village. And Conan shows up a little late, and it's one of those things, at first I thought, Is this him being like tardy or something? But they do clear up almost immediately. He was supposed to do chores, and he's like, I finished them. Which, like, apparently he did, because, like, Dad Nan, I was half expecting Dad Nan to respond like, no, you didn't. There's no way. What I gave you would have taken you all day today. But apparently that, and that tells us that's how devoted Conan is to being a warrior. And Dadnan is not giving him the, that kind of thing of like, you want to avoid, like, if your father chooses who has an important position, it's really unfortunate if he just really obviously chooses you, his offspring. I mean, that is one of the problems in so-called democracies here in the West sometimes, and corporations sometimes. Yeah, I would love to be able to say that countries like America have an actual democracy, real representative democracy where every vote counts. But the Republicans don't really want that, because they would rather cheat at democracy than change their ideas to be more popular. Anyway, I think, yeah, and I like that, in fact, not only does he not give, he doesn't show favoritism towards Conan, he does the opposite. Conan shows up a little late, and this is before Dadnan has sent off the others. He's explained about the egg. And he sends off the others, and I was thinking, I guess he just doesn't think Conan is ready. But then, he gets him the egg and says, "Fuck you waiting for? Why are you staying around?" And so, yeah, the others get a head start, and yet he wins. Which is, of course, in part because of the Picts scheme. I'm not certain he would have completely won. Oh, he was definitely close. And I do also like, there is no mention of, don't fight dirty. That's never said, and no one is punished for, because they definitely do fight dirty, because yeah, the person who gets there first with the egg intact wins this, the ability to fight with the warriors. That does mean that if you shove or trip someone else, punch them in the gut so that they accidentally swallow, chew, spit out the egg, that fucks them over. And that's, I don't like it, but there are a number of battles that were won because the winner was willing to fight dirty. And that is something that Dadman understands and respects. He does not, he tells them to win. He doesn't tell them to never fight dirty. And we do see, sometimes Conan does fight dirty. And yeah, I guess that does bring us to the yeah, and also just, it's, I don't know, it's kind of corny, but I liked it. I thought it was cool. So he comes back, he's got the heads of the Picts, then he spits out the egg onto the ground, and we see, yeah, clearly it only cracked when it hit the ground. He spit it on the ground. You don't think he's a joke, do you? And yeah, that was also just very cool with the Picts, great fight, and I like that at least one of the times he specifically was able to take out one of them, because they underestimated him. They're like, this is just a boy. So he grabs the knife and stabs, like, I think it was the thigh or something, which, like, I have never been stabbed there or anywhere else. From what I understand, that is a very, like, that guy is not going to be able to move as well, yeah, his yeah, the it fucks up his ability to, his stance is going to be much weaker. And yeah, even from when he's a child, we see very clearly Conan is brutal. Like, there's no holding back. He doesn't seem to feel upset later, anything like that, which once again really tells us this is his culture. And when he comes out, like, he returns to his village with heads that were cut off, and no one is like, we gotta watch that kid. Like, this is a future serial killer we're looking at. It's just like, well done. That was extra credit. And yeah, when the thing about, so yeah, I do appreciate the way that the Fire and Ice, the dialogue and the acting does underline how important this is, and the fact that the first thing Conan says is the fire. Passion is more important to victory. And when Ron Perlman shoots him a look, and it's one of those things. Ron Perlman shoots you this look, WYD. It's yeah, the understandably he's like, ice, I guess. And then the explanation, it's both. So it's a trick question, basically, because he said which of the two. But the or wait, did he say of the two? Maybe he said which. I guess technically means both is an acceptable answer. Anyway, yeah, so Conan is open to accepting that the fire by itself is not enough. I think also, I'll just very briefly say, so the very, very end, I believe it's the last line is, you are not ready for the sword yet, you must first understand it. And it's like, he seemed to fight really well there at the end. Is that not him understanding, or is that him understanding it, and I just don't know why he now understands it, because that, I don't know, I really wish I could point to specific, because like in the first movie, I talk about it in my video, in the spoiler section of my video for that, I understand where it is we see, like when there is significant change in major characters in that movie, I can pinpoint that's it. That's where that happened, I think that does bring us nicely to, yeah, so the, yeah, it genuinely is a very, very effective, it's in both of these, when Dadnan dies, very, very, like, it gets to you. I really appreciate that in this one, I'm not spoiling the first one, just, you can mentally compare for those who watched, but in this one, it's drawn out, and it's this thing of like, I feel like Conan might spend the rest of his life wondering, could I have saved my father? I have decided I will not give the exact title, but there is at least one Jean-Claude Van Damme movie that I was very reminded of with this. If you know, you know. If I had a copy, I'd do a video. But I think that might bring us to, let's see, there's at least one more thing that I wanted to say about, yeah, and also really appreciate, and that's, for the rest of his life, he's going to bear that scar over his eye, as a reminder, it drives all his actions. He cannot see past it. Nicely done. I see what you did there. Because they could have had him dodge it. I suppose that's one of the only, that and him losing against Lang, which in his defense, he had been poisoned, those are basically the only times he ever fails. The rest of the movie, he always succeeds at what he sets out to do. And I do think that it would have been great if there had just been, one or two times more. And I do think that is an area where the original does a better job. Yeah. But I think, yeah. And, the fact that the actual death of Dadnan is him having all of that molten lead or whatever it is, molten metal at least of some kind, poured all over his face, which, yeah, I see the Friday the 13th Marcus Nispel in that, certainly, and a lot of the other violence, but that definitely felt like something that, if that movie had been set at the same time as this, but, would have been in there. I guess, let's see. I think that does bring us to the part where, So yeah, he, next we see him. He's an adult. He's all mamoed, and I do appreciate that here he is freeing slaves, including slave women. They do still have the thing. This time, it's really only implied that. I mean, I don't know if Conan specifically, but I feel like at least someone has sex with at least one of these slave women, but it's their decision. Which like it's I don't know. I don't think I am qualified to argue for or against. So what I will just say is, obviously, the idea is this was a time of such brutality that a freed sex slave would most likely have sex with at least one of the people who freed her. But I do think the fact that they also have, because like Conan and the others just say, you are now free. And I like that that one slave girl calls them out on it. She's like, you took our food. There's obviously no other option. They do seem happy about it. I don't know. I'm not speaking further to it. What I will say is I'm glad that it was more casually implied, and like I can watch this entire movie and feel like I'm not sure that I would say for sure that Conan did have sex with one of these former slaves, which I cannot say for the first movie. Now, I think that might bring us to, yeah, so when they, so there's the thing about, the narrator says, the Lane character became, disappeared into shadow, something like that. And now, and there's the line about, these people have no connection to the actual, yeah, to Lang's character, and he just says no one should be a slave. I was a tiny bit worried that we were going to get a bunch of short scenes of just Conan doing things that didn't relate to the plot, but it really was only that one. Other than that, everything is, and yeah, it is so short that it doesn't, yeah. And, it is characterization. It does help. Because the thing is, if you don't have that, what's the first time he does a good deed then? And I'm not saying he has to, but it does feel like they want this Conan to be, yeah, to have a conscience. And I suppose I won't spoil if the Arnie version does or not. I will simply say I thought the decision they made in that one made sense. And this one does as well. Yeah, so they are, let's see. Yeah, they're, I guess I don't really have anything to say about that scene, so I'll move on to the next one. Yeah, I quite liked, probably the biggest source of charisma in this movie was his buddy, that, and yeah, so they have a thing about like, oh, he's aging a bit, but, he still puts in as much effort as he can at all, and he saves Conan's life. If not for him picking, him and the people picking him up in the ship, yeah, Lang and McGowan would have killed Conan and won the movie. So, we have an African American character help save the day, which I mentioned in my video on the first one. I did not love how that movie was when it came to African Americans. Though I do appreciate that it's not only white people or even white men who, or even men who save the day. Now, I think that does bring us to, let's see. Yeah, I thought they did a good job on the actress playing the younger version of the McGowan character. And even if I didn't, if I knew nothing about this movie and I saw that character, I would have been like, she's going to grow up to be Rose McGowan, isn't she? You know, clearly this actress paid close attention to the line delivery and vibe of McGowan. Like, genuinely, sometimes the fact that McGowan has not exclusively played witches, some good, some bad, is genuinely, like, I don't know. I mean, hopefully it's I honestly don't know. Hopefully it's because she just doesn't want to only play characters like that, but she could have just, I mean, if there were enough movies about witches, I suppose, but yeah, it is, she just has that kind of mysterious, feminine mystique to her, which, yeah. And she also does well when she doesn't play to that. I think that does cover the, let's see. But yeah, you know, Rose McGowan, Fairuza Balk. I hope I pronounced that right. For some fucking reason, I always swap out the Z and the R in her name. But they could definitely both have played nothing other than witches, and if there was enough witchy work, which there isn't, I appreciate that that could have been their entire careers. Anyway, I think, and I do also think Bulk could have done this well. I do think overall McGowan is, I don't know, I suppose part of it is that when McGowan plays a witch, there is this sort of, like, she doesn't even have to raise her voice, whereas Bulk's witch, and I love this about when, I actually only know one time she played a witch, come to think of it, but in The Craft, you know, when she unleashes, she is like at a, you know, I mean, from a scale of 1 to 10, I'd say McGowan in intensity is probably like a 4 or a 5, and Bulk is like 100. Now, that does bring us nicely to the, yeah, and I also thought they did a good job of, you know, we get, you know, we meet, other than Lang and McGowan, we meet two others, two of the guys working for them. In, you know, when Conan loses Dad Nan and is left for dead, and this is also a case where I really felt like, okay, this makes perfect sense. I understand why they would think that there's no way Conan is ever going to be able to come after them. You know, it is still the James Bond villain thing of like, you know, now that I have you exactly where I want you, and I could wait and make sure that you don't make it out of this, I'm going to leave for no good reason. I appreciate it's supposed to be like a hubris, ego, that's part of why they lose. It can get frustrating when there's that many Bond movies where it happens. I'm not giving an exact number, don't worry. I think that does bring us to the, so yeah, he recognizes, you know, no-nos, who knows, and yeah, you know, they're after the thief. And I think they did a good job of, you know, the thief is another element that also plays some role, I'm not saying exactly which or how big or anything, in the original. And I think, you know, when I first realized, oh, we have another thief character, I was also thinking, I hope this isn't too similar. I felt like they did enough to distinguish them because there was just enough character. Like, I will say, you know, I know the actor can do more than what he's given a chance to here. I loved his work in the first Wonder Woman movie. But, you know, it's not nothing. He also adds some charisma, or adds some charisma. And yeah, it worked. This thing of like, you know, why are they after you? And then, you know, he lets himself get captured, which is also like, so even when he lets himself get captured, he just can't help but beat up some people, which I get it. If he just went up to them and said, take me captive, they might just snort and turn and walk away. But now he's given them serious reason to, because they were looking for the thief. They weren't there for anybody else. They were happy to hurt others, but they weren't necessarily going to take any other prisoners, you know. And I think that does bring us nicely to, yeah, that again is, I get it. It is cool. It's very 2010s. Part of Conan's badassery is he doesn't even need, he just fights his way free. I think that's an area where I would have liked if he had to maybe work with another prisoner or something. I guess that's a spoiler for that movie. I'll just say there's at least one movie that has a somewhat similar situation where the hero does need to work with someone else in order to get free, and I thought it was compelling in that movie, and I think it could have worked well here. Instead, it's just he frees. Yeah. If not for him, the thief would not be free, which I also get as this kind of debt thing, but maybe he could have worked with someone else, because I think it works well. When I really like the poetic justice of, so, oh, you're going to take prisoners, well, and abuse them? Okay, I guess let's see what happens if those prisoners get their hands on you. I thought that worked. So yeah, like if hypothetically you had done something like, maybe, tell you what, maybe you could even have a thing of like, they're gonna have the prisoners kill Conan, and maybe at first it looks like the prisoners actually will, and Conan just like tells them, you can kill me now and stay here until you die, or you can help me kill the guards and leave right now. Something like that. Because at the end of the day, like, he clearly understands tactics, but it tends to be one-man show kind of tactics, and yeah, I think it would have been more striking, because by the end he is working with more people, and yeah, even before that he does work with other people. So I don't know, maybe they're doing a thing of like you have to earn his trust, which that I would say is pretty consistent. You have to earn his trust. I just I don't know, maybe there's a different way, but yeah, I think I made my point. So yeah, very cool as he fights his way out. Yeah, the thing with, so he gets to the guy who had a aggressive nose job, and at first the guy doesn't even recognize him, and then he's like, "I'm the reason you're pretty." That's a good line. That's a good line. And perhaps the grossest thing in the movie, which I'm here for. Like, I wouldn't be watching Conan movies if I couldn't handle gross shit. Yeah, like, I guess that's another way to do an aggressive nose job. And yeah, my God, I don't even want to think about what the fuck that feels like. Jesus Christ. And yeah, he gets the thief free. And I really like the thing about, if I tell you what you want to know, spare my life. And he says, I won't kill you. And the guy, so there's a Danish saying that I'm not sure translates, but when we, one of the ways we can say that person is smart is they have legs in their nose, or bones in their nose, or a word for bone and leg is the same. I'm not going to pretend like I understand what that exactly means, why that would translate to being smart, but whatever. I don't know. I feel like maybe he had that, and when Conan snipped, that went away, because he doesn't stop to think. You worded that very carefully. But yeah, and so takes off the key, puts in his mouth, makes sure he swallows, shoves him out there, and tells hey, you want your freedom? Gut him like a fish. And he said you spared my life. I told you I wouldn't kill you. And that's it. Also, I think a strong case could be made that they deserve more, because they have been abused for him for longer. Conan deserves to kill Lang's character. Now, I think that does... So yeah, he gets some information, which helps him get further, and, the thief tells him, Come Look Me Up. And I think that does get us to the... Is that not when... Yeah, yeah. So they go and get the other... Oh, wait, no, yeah. I gotta think. There's a thing about, they have to move through this particular area, and that's a good place for an ambush. So they plan the ambush, and when he sees a wagon moving fast, he assumes that's got to be Lang's character, and that is, of course, an unfortunate way for him and Tamara to meet, because she thinks he must be one of Lang's people. So good bit of, because we kind of need them to not work together immediately, even though they have literally the exact same goal. They have no reason to work against each other, but first impressions can be difficult to fix. It gives them somewhere to go, and I felt like both actors did a good job there. Yeah, so that's when we get to the so we see that place with Rachel and the others, and I thought they did a good job of, like, it's very clear Rachel wants to be part of this world. She is a monk. She identifies herself as such later. She doesn't say, oh, thank God, I don't have to be a monk anymore. That was also, it felt, I don't know, maybe a tiny bit. So at one point, I think it's, when Dad Man says, what are you waiting for? He says something like, for Crom's sake, which did feel a tiny bit like, okay, we get it. Crom is still their deity, just like in the original. Is this, I don't know. It was a little tiny bit corny in just because it's the fact that it's literally like, a Christian might say, for God's sake, in that exact situation. And it just maybe felt a little bit too modern for me. I feel like it might have been a good place to say, in the name of Crom, what are you standing around for? Why, boy, do you stand around? Something like that. Make it feel more, because most of the dialogue in the movie does feel like, that's probably about how they talked back then, with some modern. No, yeah, that is meant to say that in the review. The original does have this one beat, with the dialogue really sounding like, okay, that's how they talked back then. And this one, once again, 80s versus 2010s, the way they make movies, they were a little bit more afraid back then compared to the 80s to have dialogue that is, because I've watched the original with others, and otherwise we talked about, like, what the fuck did that mean? Why did they say it like that? And eventually I feel like we got to a place where it made sense, but it didn't immediately, not upon hearing it. And in this, I wouldn't really say that was ever the case. Which also makes the little bit there is stand out. The man Conan sought became one with the shadows, since the oceans drank Atlantis, and then at the same time, for Crom's sake, that, yeah. Anyway, I think that does... So yeah, McGowan and Lang and their forces, attack the city. And I appreciated this point made about, Tamara is sent away because they know, about the pureblood situation. And so, he says, we value life. And Lang points out, you killed my wife. You value death. And he defends himself by saying, you were gonna, I forget the details, but yeah, you were gonna do bad shit. She was trying to do something evil. That's why. And I do think, once again, I really appreciate, I don't remember if this is also the case in Destroyer and Red Sonja, but certainly both of the movies named Conan the Barbarian that I've watched, I actually don't even remember. Have they made another since this? Well, maybe I'll look it up after. I would probably be fine watching another one of these if it looks good, at least. But the like right now, I'm not necessarily planning on watching another Hellboy movie, for example. Anyway, the Where were we? Were we werewolves? Yeah. This was a really brutal time and place, and as such, yeah, even these monks have at least once killed someone, and once confronted with it, admit it and try to justify it. That is I don't think it would feel like Conan, at least to me. And I appreciate, I've only watched these two movies, haven't read any others, but from what I understand, it is consistent. These are very violent world, and yeah, and it also shows that violence begets violence. They thought they solved it by killing, and they didn't. They just kicked the can down the road, and now more people are dead. I mean, I'm not saying that this is perhaps a solution that could have been solved without violence, and I also appreciate that by the end of this movie, technically it has been solved by violence. But I do think it is worth noting. They didn't fail because they refused to kill anyone, And this is the kind of thing that has happened so many times in human history. Someone kills someone else, and then later their brother or son or someone who agreed with the ideology came and killed the person who killed the original. But it just, yeah, it can go on forever. Blood feuds. An eye for an eye leaves the world blind. Now, I think, yeah, and I really did appreciate. So I mentioned that the magic in this movie is sometimes more about like acting rather than special effects. I did think it really worked when McGowan, so she's got the Freddy Krueger fingers and she's fucking sticking, pricking for some blood and then licking it off. And that is a face that has tasted human blood before. That is not like, it's got kind of a, what is it they say, metallic taste? I've never tasted blood, but yeah, from what I understand, it has a metallic taste. And she's like, this is not the best blood I've drank today, let me tell you. None of these are pure. And so they realize they gotta go after, so yeah, appreciate that. That also felt like, I feel like there's 80s movies where this scene would have ended with them realizing, they must be too far away, and that would have bought more time for bonding between Conan and Tamara, and then like a couple of scenes after they would have caught up. But instead, we have an actual action scene here, which I don't know. Sometimes I just have a soft spot for more action as long as it's all good. Now, I think yeah, I thought the entire bit with the carriage worked, and from what I understand, Rachel Nichols actually did a bunch of her own stunts, which is very cool. Apparently Momoa hated riding a horse because he is afraid of them. I think he did a good job covering for that, because I didn't really sense that in his performance at all. I don't blame him. I have never ridden a horse. I have been close enough to a horse that I was very careful about not standing behind it. Anyway, I think I will say, it is, I liked getting to feed it a carrot. I'm not made of stone. School trip, I think, to answer, in case anyone was wondering. Anyway, yeah. I don't know. Maybe that raises even more questions, like how can an entire building trip and fall? It's a long story. Anyway, I think that does bring us nicely. But yeah, so he opens the top of it and he's like, "You're not who I expected." And she's like, "GTFO." And yeah, some really cool fighting on horses. And yeah, really appreciate how, once again, like I mentioned, how dynamic this is. He's riding, he's on top of the carriage, they're fighting horse to horse, just, and then, other times it's, they are on the ground fighting, with swords. Just, yeah. And I do really like Conan able to turn in anything within reach into a weapon, and yeah, able to outmaneuver. Yeah, I guess that does bring us to the yeah, you know what, a real quick one thing I think would have worked for the whole thing of, which is more important, the fire or the ice. If when he fought the Picts, if there was a situation where it becomes clear, he could have made out better if he had ice. But it's like, well, the others ran off, he stayed, but he also won. He didn't, like, that's maybe I don't know, if something had happened that had long-lasting effects or something, but it doesn't in that scene. Yeah, if there had been a situation where if he had ice in his veins, as his father later tells him he needs, that could have gone better. But instead, like, it does work out, and then later we could have seen a similar situation, and now he does show the patience. Or maybe even have a reminder, have another scene where he should have patience, and again goes a little wrong, and then the third time he has the patience and the meats. But the yeah, so they yeah, and he captures that one person who pretends to be asleep, which also I thought that was going to be a thing, but then not long after he just reveals that he is awake by shouting out something, and it's like, I guess he needs ice too, and in his veins, not in his city. Not sure anyone needs it in their city. And I think that does pretty well bring us to, yeah. So did not love Rachel getting tied up. She definitely spends more time than needed in this movie tied up. And that is, listen, I have heard that is also a thing in some of the original stories, at least. I get that. I don't think it was necessary, especially not more than once. I get the idea of, well, he doesn't really trust her, and yeah, it gives them somewhere to go. I think if there had been some other kind of, yeah, I don't know, maybe especially because, like, once he feels she's talking too much, he also gags her, which, like, can we just not, and maybe not even say we did? That does bring us to, yeah, so they get some information out of the guy, and yeah, the thing with, the message catapulting him there. Love that one shot where we like see his face as he's flying through the air, and I know there had to be some technical trickery there, some special effects. I didn't really see the seams, honestly, but yeah, just the fear on his face, and yeah. And apparently they were both asleep in there, so that's a rude awakening. And they, it's quite a jolt. They get up out of their, the seats or beds or whatever it was, and go over to look at him, presumably to see if they can find a snooze button. And yeah, I think. Oh, right. Obviously, before that, when they confront, wasn't his name Kamar, or was that someone else? Okay, you know what? For now, he's called Lang. Lang's character, for this, I will call him Lang. He asks her in the carriage, "Where's Lang?" And she's like, "I'll do you one better. Who's Lang?" And then, like, I mean, I don't see anyone, so I guess whoever that character is, they're invisible, goes, "I'll do you one better. Why is Lang?" You had to know that one was coming. Anyway, yeah, I think that does bring us nicely to, yeah, so the message with the time and place for the trade, and they think he wants gold. They assume that anyone can be bought, and yeah, really great fight. It's one of those cases where, so it doesn't always work if you have the hero and villain fight at like the halfway mark, and that's pretty close to the halfway mark, you know, because like we know, no, you know, neither of them are going to win. Obviously, like the movie's not gonna, like, I wouldn't necessarily mind if the rest of the movie was Rose McGowan as the only villain, and we know Conan's not gonna, like, disregarding the fact that, I mean, I'm not sure anybody expects a Conan movie to end with Conan dying. Certainly it's not going to happen at the halfway mark, you know. I will say was a very cool fight. You know, the choreography is definitely, did I mention that in the review? I meant to. The choreography of this movie is better in most. Yeah. And once again, you know, 1980s movie making versus 2010s. You know, I'm not blaming the 80s one for that. And as mentioned, you know, overall, I prefer that movie. Anyway, I think, does that pretty much bring us? Yeah, and so in IMDb trivia, I think it was, apparently, originally there were lines, I think it was lines of dialogue. It was certainly, there was something in the script that ultimately was removed, but the, yeah, the McGowan character has an Electra complex, and I definitely did get the vibe still. I will admit, I don't know if I would have picked up on it if I hadn't read that there was meant to be even more, but it definitely, yeah, I really appreciated them giving her more than, yeah. And if I recall correctly, I think she also played her own mother. So that obviously adds to this thing of, yeah. So very nicely done on that. But yeah, you know, she helps Lang cheat. And I appreciated that, like, he definitely noticed that. And he never tells her that he wishes she hadn't. So, like, yeah, he is someone who wants to win at any cost. And she is someone who is happy to participate. You know, she'll pretty much do anything for him. And yeah, that made it more compelling. You know, sometimes when a woman is a villain and not the main, she doesn't get a lot, and that's unfortunate because, like, you know, this is a progressive channel. We support women's rights and women's wrongs, and female villains, when they're not mired in misogynistic tropes, can be so much fun, both to watch and clearly for a lot of these actresses to play. And yeah, is did I already mention McGowan looks like she's having the time of her life in this movie? You know, just yeah, and yeah, I think that does pretty much cover the entire. Yeah, I guess I wouldn't have hated if there had been at least one good witch, but as far as evil witches go, I did appreciate, you know, they don't make her, like, you know, once again, like, we understand both her and Lang, we get where they're coming from. You know, this woman who was extremely important to them was killed. And the, let's see, I guess that does bring us nicely to, yeah, so that was an area where, you know, I mentioned in the spoiler review, the geography, I was a little bit surprised when we saw, oh yeah, there's water right there, there's a boat right there, ship, I can never tell the difference, right there. But I also appreciate, like, if we had known the whole time, you know, I don't know, I might have been like, oh, I mean, they're going to escape by sea then. Someone's going to escape by sea, whoever is starting to lose. Because once again, I did kind of realize going in, you know, neither of them is going to end up dead by the end of this. I will also say, I really liked seeing, and that's one of the reasons why you hire someone like Lang, you know, it was cool action. It was, it's not that I thought the first movie needed more in the way of, you know, sword fights between Conan and villain characters, but it was a difference that appeals to a 2010s audience, and yeah, it's kind of sometimes me for this kind of thing, you know. Yeah, I thought it really worked, and it was just fucking cool that he's got like. So yeah, at first it looks like he's got this badass sword that's like split down the middle, and we do see him use that. And I also really liked that at one point, I think that might be in the climactic battle, but Conan actually turns it on him, you know, in a very cool way. But it turns out he's got two swords that are mostly stuck together, and so he can fucking dual wield if he needs to. That was really, really cool. And at one point, they even both dual wield. But but yeah, and also that, you know, Conan ends up having to fight against, you know, his father's sword there in the climax. So that's also very cool. But yeah, I think that does bring us nicely to... I also wouldn't have hated if they had spent just a tiny bit more time on Conan recovering, because he was fucking poisoned. It was bad enough that he lost a battle for the first time. Was it ever? Did he lose a battle when the village was attacked the second time? I forget if he maybe even didn't have a chance to. I just don't remember anymore. Anyway, yeah, you know, bad short-term memory. I'm not saying the movie is unmemorable. Yeah, so that is when they get to that place, and they ask for, you know, they ask for him by name after being told, you know, this is an entire city of thieves. Like, listen, in this place, everywhere you look, everyone around here is trying to take money that doesn't belong to them, even if they probably have way more than they'll ever need. Just consider it, everyone here is a CEO. But yeah, you know, once he mentions him by name, he does get taken there. I will also say, so everyone there steals? Holy crap. Insurance premiums must be just through the roof. Possibly almost as expensive as in America. And yeah, he helps get them there. And that was also, I thought they struck a good balance. You know, he's obviously not as much of a fighter, but he's also not like nothing, like useless. It was very cool when he's like in the steel cage, and it's like, I mean, if that thing sinks any lower, he's gonna drown pretty quick, even if Conan kills the beast there. So that was a good kind of, you know, there's multiple threats going on there. And yeah, the animation on the creature there, I get wanting at least one creature in there, because, you know, that is something, you know, the original movie does more of that, and I think it works there. I don't think it would have worked here. I get having at least one in there. I think it would have felt like it should have been there if it hadn't been. I wish they had showed it a tiny bit less. Maybe kept it slightly darker, but I also appreciate if they had made it much darker, much dimmer lighting. We would not have been able to see a fucking thing. So that is, of course, a situation they had to deal with there. But yeah, it's also just, you know, to be clear, I don't too much blame. Like, I remember other 2010s movies. It was difficult to get CG exactly right. I think, let's see, what was the original that I think the first time that I felt like, okay, CG is genuinely photorealistic throughout at least one entire movie, I think was around 2014. So this was just shy of that. I don't know that I can think of a movie that had a lot of CG from before 2014 where there wasn't even one time where I was like, that's not 100% convincing, you know, no matter how big a budget, how much time they spent on the effects. So I don't hold that against them. And they definitely didn't show the big snake thing for longer than like was needed for tension and suspense and such. Yeah, so they get back out of there. And let's see, they are... Yeah, what is the next thing? I don't quite remember. Let's just go to the climax, actually. I am not even sure I have terribly much more to even say. But I appreciated Tamara the character Tamara being, you know, she does try, you know, she claims she's not pure blood, but, you know, yeah, one prick, and it has been confirmed. I liked that she fought back, but that it felt like, well, no, yeah, she is a monk. You know, she is, and not a warrior monk, she is a monk. She is someone who is willing to fight, and once again, she can get some results, you know. That was an area where it felt less misogynistic. Also, the fact that the McGowan character had so much personality and character, you know, and it did not feel like, oh, you know, women are just evil, I guess, you know, because Tamara is also in a good chunk of the movie, and she's clearly not evil. She has a ruthless, you know, there's the thing about don't kill him yet. You can kill him now. You know, once again, dangerous time. Everybody has some brutality to them. She is not needlessly cruel. You know, she fights those who would harm, you know, but not, yeah. Yeah, and I thought they did a good job of making it convincing that she would be able to win the fights that she does win. And at the same time, you know, we also, it is necessary for the climax to work that we believe, yeah, she wouldn't be able to fight her way out of here, you know. That's the thing. I don't think it would have been convincing if Conan had been, you know, chained up or something at any point in this movie. We, you know, based on the way he's depicted, you know, because like, oh, he always makes it out on top. Now, I think that does bring us to, yeah, so, you know, they are getting ready to carry it out. We have our ticking clock, not quite literally, but yeah, you know, and I also thought they did a pretty good job. I suppose the mask, okay, so the CG on that was also not perfect. It was better than the scene it reminded me of, which I don't want to spoil what movie that's from, but I'll just say it goes with the line, we all wear masks, metaphorically speaking. But yeah, I thought they did a good job not making it look really silly, especially once the effect was done and it was just an actual mask they had on the actor, like a physical thing that he could respond to, you know, that, yeah, that worked for me. And yeah, fantastic action. I don't have too much more to say about that. I guess, yeah, it was, it was cool, this thing of like, you know, the witch, McGowan managed to possess Tamara. I also like the thing about, you know, she is my property, I am no one's property. That was good. And the, yeah, you know, so she is struggling back against it, and she actually says, you know, let me drop, you know, because that she feels would be better, and that is a very strong character moment, you know, because it's not like she's like suicidal or something. When she's told, you know, you have to get out of the city, they'll capture you. If she was suicidal, that's when she would carry that out, you know, but she's willing to die to protect the rest of the world, and that is a very strong character moment. And like, I don't think women should have to, but it is, you know, it is true. There are a lot of women, in part because of socialization. We're not doing bioessentialism here. You know, a lot of women are willing to give up a lot for others, sometimes especially men, and I'm probably pretty much a broken record on it these days, but I feel like I keep watching stuff where it comes up. I don't think women should have to give up anywhere near as much. I think we should strive towards equality where men and women, and I mean non-binary, but I don't think they are giving a little right now. But, you know, everyone of any gender should, you know, it should be evenly divided how much we're giving up to make the world a better place. Yeah, I don't think that should rest on any one group or individual or anything. And I'm not saying the movie is handling it badly. I'm saying it's a good character moment. See, that's one of the things where, if this movie had been made several decades back, certainly if it had come out like in the 50s or 60s or something, instead of saying, it's okay, let me drop, this is the only way, she would have been like screaming, and we, the audience, would have been supposed to laugh at her. Just that kind of misogyny used to be much more prevalent. Now, I guess that does cover... I just realized I didn't do video recommendations yet. You know what? While I try to think of if there's more that I even have to say, I am going to real quick find... I swear it won't take long for me to find. So we got to the... Yeah. So, some videos. Edgier Than Thou's Matt Walsh posting his L's. Major Archetypes, continued series on everything transphobic J.K. Rowling did, in this case in 2022. Rebecca Watson, skeptic. U.S. Navy head is scared of witches in CA. I went to find them. Mother Jones, we could see the largest drop in black representation since the end of Reconstruction. And Broe Deschanel's When the City Becomes Content. All well worth watching. Yeah, I'm slightly torn because I'm on the record as noting that I think any action movie that can make it work, where it wouldn't feel like forced in, if you can have at least one action scene where people are bare minimum in, even better if on, or right next to, or something like that. Well, yeah. On is the ideal. Next to is not nothing. A vehicle moving fast while in an action scene. That can really add so much. Because there's just an inherent tension. Because, like, if the vehicle is moving fast enough, then whether it makes a turn or suddenly brakes or increases in speed, any one of these things can throw off someone standing on it, and they might die just from the sheer impact. That adds extra tension, and I appreciate that we couldn't always do this. I'm not asking for all action movies to have it, not even today, but when you can, So obviously, the carriage scene, that, I really appreciated that. But in this other scene, so it's not quite a vehicle, but we have some of the same. The bit with, Tamara on the wheel, and, they are swinging and standing on it, and the whole, that was really cool. And we immediately can tell, okay, if she falls, she dies. And if just one of those supports, there's like 3 supports, if one of them fails, the wheel is going to fall. That's it, And by this point, we are attached to her, much like her to the chains on the wheel. And yeah, they did a really solid job on that. And that was one area I suppose I already mentioned. But yeah, we see he has ice in him now because he is focused enough to save her rather than purely keep fighting. And see, yeah, you know what? That's the thing. I think at the start of the movie, maybe one of the other kids from the village is frozen in fear, and Conan has a chance to save him, but instead fights the other Picts when he doesn't strictly need to, and the kid ends up dead. That would very much, then you have a clear arc there. Now, yeah, I suppose that does cover the entire movie. Okay, I'm just real quick going to mentally fast forward through the entire thing. I like the fact that even without a hand, and even though she's not even super physically close, she's still, able to possess Tamara. And yeah, the fact that they do cut off her hand, and because that's something, once again, she's been using, she's got those claws. She never takes those fucking things off, does she? That's great. See, I'm sorry. Sometimes that works really well for a villain. If they just never put their weapon down at all, I don't think there's even one scene. She doesn't use them every single scene, but I think she always has them on. That's really fucking cool. That's part of her identity. She is always stabbing people. And yeah, you know, so when it's cut off after we've seen her use it to you know, pierce skin so many times, not too many, but enough that nobody has forgotten. Yeah, there's again a catharsis to it, you know. Yeah, I think that might just about cover the entire thing. I appreciated that they're at the end, you know, they don't, let's see, I think they said something like, you know where to find me, or something like that, you know, but they do go their separate ways, because at the end of the day, like, Conan is not like looking to settle down. He's going to go on more adventures, but he might return to her after that, something like that, you know. That was a good way to do that. Now, I think that might just about... Right, I like when the monk leader threw in their face, you know, we don't sacrifice our own. And I guess that does... Yeah. I really appreciated the way that, you know, sorry to mention, you know, yeah, necromancy, you know, that is something that, you know, when we hear of that, we're like, oh, I really hope that they lose. Unless you're playing as them in Heroes of Might and Magic 3. Video forthcoming at some point. Don't hold your breath. It might be a while. It's, yeah, I like playing as them. Anyway, but yeah, you know, so there's this thing about how they, you know, they don't really care. Their actions seem to suggest that the fact that people get hurt by what they do, you know, it doesn't, you know, it doesn't perhaps make them stop on their own to, you know, yeah, do what they do. You know, which once again, you know, in fiction, it can be cathartic. In real life, I would not want violence used, you know, in order to stop, unless it's an absolute last resort. But, you know, let's hope it never comes to that. But yeah, you know, so they don't stop on their own, even though clearly what they're doing is hurting people. They're kind of obsessed with accomplishing this one thing, and they won't let something that, you know, should probably just be abandoned at this point. They just refuse to stop because they you know, one track mind. They want this to succeed. So I suppose it's not unlike how tech billionaires are treating AI right now.